Hey listeners, it's Paul Andriola here. Why not join our community at Small Cap Discoveries, where we offer our members direct access to some of the best microcap investment opportunities available. Our members are getting access to premium microcap financings, research reports, and direct access to management. Sign up today at www.smallcapdiscoveries.com.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Small Cap Discoveries conference call. Today on our call, we have the CEO, Dr. Jennifer Bath from ImmunoPrecise Antibodies. ImmunoPrecise trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol IPA. The company currently trades at $3.18 with about 25 million shares outstanding, or about a $72 million market cap. I'd now like to hand it over to Paul Andriola.
Hey, thanks, Trevor. Jennifer, welcome back. Good to see you. It's been a long time since we've spoken. Lots has happened since last time we spoke, and certainly last time we interviewed you. So happy to have you back, and would love to catch up. But before we do that and jump into some questions, just maybe just remind everybody what ImmunoPrecise Antibodies is all about.
Sure, happy to. So good to see you as well, Paul, as always, and thank you for having me. So ImmunoPrecise Antibodies, it's better known as IPA for anyone who is not familiar with what we do. We have a very strong historical track record in the discovery and development of therapeutic and diagnostic antibodies. We do those programs really end to end as a fee-for-service type of work for biotech and large pharma company. One of the things that we've really been emphasizing over the course of the last year is really how to utilize a lot of the metadata and information that we've been collecting for the last 4 to 5 years. And in large part, really applying AI technologies through our most recent acquisition called BioStrand to our current capabilities, and in a number of different ways, looking at how do we improve the actual process of drug discovery? How do we bring about novel ways of doing that enable us to do that faster, that enable us to do things that can't historically be done in a laboratory setting? How do we do that with faster revenue recognition and with higher profit margins? And then really ultimately, how do we take this technology and the fundamental patented capabilities that drive our AI technology to really alter the landscape of how software can be used in the complete de novo in silico development of new drugs. So that's a very big part of our emphasis right now, as all of our sites throughout Canada and Europe really work to connect to and provide a very interactive learning loop with the AI component of our company.
Mm-hmm. I definitely want to dive into BioStrand in a moment and get sort of caught up with the latest there. But why don't we let's move sort of into the other parts of the business first and get caught up on some things there. You know, you are a CRO. That's the core sort of function of what you do. You know, that means a lot of different things, right? So there's a lot of different things going on. But maybe give us an update if you can, just on the sort of the non-BioStrand stuff, the CRO, sort of the old school stuff, if we want to call it that. Let's get caught up a bit there and tell us what's been happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So CRO, also again, for those who might not be familiar with this concept, it's contract research organization. It is now kind of the standard way for large pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, and even smaller, almost virtual companies to produce, develop, and manufacture drug products. And we do this on a fee-for-service basis. So we've always really kind of looked at this as the bread and butter of the organization, with ongoing, continual, and growing revenue. But in addition to that, obviously, it's a lot more than that for us, because we're very, very focused on data, good quality data, and how do we best use and apply that data. So most recently in our CRO, it's actually been kind of a fun ride over the last 4 or 5 months in the contract research side of what we do. We have kind of 3 core different locations that contribute. We have our Canadian site, which does upstream discovery work primarily with very, very I would say, powerful characterization capabilities that help to really identify lead candidates, help people understand the quality of the antibodies that have been discovered and which ones you might really want to move forward as potential therapeutics. That site is really well known for what we call its function first B-cell platform, which has incredible inputs and outputs that really provide a lot of information to clients. Has been our primary revenue driver at that site. And that site year over year has been growing about 20%, which is really phenomenal in the contract research organizational space, and primarily due to that particular service offering. I think one of the things that is most interesting about that growth at that site is they've actually been working pretty much at capacity. So they've had to be really quite innovative in order to continue to do this type of work. And we've really sought to come alongside them in management to find ways to make sure that we stay ahead now of that capacity. So that site will actually be moving into an expansion, which will enable them to take on a lot of programs right now that are actually starting to queue, as well as to explore some interest in some larger collaborations and endeavors with IPA. I think the other most interesting thing that's happening there, you probably heard about it either through the Jefferies talk or for the NASDAQ presentation, is that we have been working together with that site, our site in Oss, and then also BioStrand to bring forward a combination of what's called immunogenicity testing with humanization. And that portion of really that kind of concept was really spearheaded by that Victoria site, who really saw an opportunity for us to take on what's called the transgenic animal space, which is a market that really deals in utilizing genetically engineered animals that make partially human antibodies. And that space has been very popular and very expensive for producing human therapeutics. And we work with transgenic animals all the time, but obviously a lot of the benefits go to the companies that own those animals. Our new offering, in which the Canadian site will have a big hand, enables clients to very rapidly screen all the candidates early on in a program where there's very little risk in dropping out a particular candidate, screen them for their potential to move forward and for their potential to be humanized, and then combine that to a humanization process, which effectively, is saying it's giving these people the opportunity to lose these very expensive contracts and to instead also come to humanized programs, get a very early sense of the quality of that work. And then most importantly, it's not associated with all of the traditional risks and the time that you would normally find associated with the humanization process. So Canada has been very active in that. They actually now have closed, I believe it's 5 or 6 deals already after just announcing that. And that is actually set to also scale to a much more integrated and complex and even more revenue generating component of the company, which again, in large part will be done in Canada, but really spans all of our sites. So that's been very exciting there. I don't know that I've ever seen the rate of sales order conversion that I've been seeing in any of our sites that we're seeing now. So that's something we oftentimes update our investors on, is specifically that KPI metric of a sales order, which means, we quoted a client, they were able to review, have the scientific discussions, and then they've actually turned over a purchase order and initiated the program with us. Right now, that's just happening at an unprecedented rate across all 3 sites. So the other site that does discovery and development is our site in Oss in the Netherlands. It is one campus within our IPA Europe subsidiary. The Oss site also does discovery, but not overlapping discovery with Canada. And then it does a lot of downstream development work, which is really the work that goes into kind of optimizing and making sure that the product is something that will produce well in a clinical setting, something that has maybe better binding characteristics and kind of lower toxicity characteristics as well. And this site, we saw incredible growth out of this site. I believe it was somewhere around 35% for several years in a row, and they were our primary revenue driver. And one of the things that we began seeing, which is just kind of a fascinating story here. One of the things we started seeing probably about, I don't know, maybe 8 months ago, was that the main discovery portion of their offering was beginning to slow down. We were getting fewer clients coming in for that. And in a market analysis of that, one of the things that became quite clear was there was just a lot of innovation happening in that space, and a lot of AI being integrated, and a lot of different ways for people to expand on diversity of the products. And so we did something maybe a little bit kind of unusual in this, in that we immediately spotted the potential for us to kind of jump in there and bring them to a place where we could move them closer to the forefront of what's happening in the industry, as we were seeing dips in revenue, dips in sales, orders that were coming in. And so we did that, and I would say quite rapidly repackaged that, got our proof of concept in place, and really redeveloped what is historically been known as our traditional phage display program. That's now integrated with our new NGS capabilities, which are multi-species NGS capabilities and additional screening opportunities for clients. And very shortly after pitching that to the client space, we were able to land at somewhere between like 6 and 8 programs almost immediately at that site. So that site has sales orders now in the door, programs for this brand new phage display program that has been launched, which I think is surprised all of us with how quickly that was able to come online. And of course, for us, we love that new offering, because along with that NGS comes a lot of good data about human antibodies. And maybe more importantly, it sets them up, really for some runway here with an offering that's much, much more competitive in the space. So we're quite proud of the way that we identified that and caught that early and turned that around. And now what we're seeing again out of that side is really record levels of sales orders coming in. They also recently received this month a sales order for close to $1 million for one program.
Wow.
So these are really big changes for that site, who, as I mentioned a little bit earlier this year, we were starting to see that revenue decrease. So I'm really proud of the team, the way that, we identified this, the way that we jumped in, and the way that we pulled together for that site, with that site, who was instrumental in those changes as well, to really make sure that they got out there, got back out there, got more competitive than they were. So we're really seeing unprecedented levels of growth in that site as well. And then the third one is the Utrecht site. And I think people have heard a bit more about that site this year, as they did move, I believe it was October, possibly November, into their new building with Genmab and Merus. That site is primarily involved in manufacturing of proteins and antibodies, and in particular known for complex protein manufacturing. We continue to see a lot of demand in probably their most popular off-the-shelf product, which is the Wnt surrogate. We're also seeing quite a bit of an uptick in a large-scale manufacturing for actually diagnostic kits. And then, as you probably noted if you've been tuning in, they already were growing at a great rate. As soon as they got into the new building with the expanded capacity, they just were able to immediately take on more programs. So we continue to see that type of growth with that group as well. So it's exciting times for the CRO, and it's exciting times to see these new unveilings of the opportunities at BioStrand that are starting to also not only connect to some of the wet lab experiments, but also draw new clients into the wet labs because they're automatically associated with larger packages.
Yeah, that was actually going to be a bit of a follow-up question. It's just that is BioStrand starting to help the CRO business? I mean, it is a discovery method itself, but it sounds like it's starting to help some of the wet lab. I mean, I call it wet lab, but that
we do.
It's starting to see that. The other question I was going to ask is, like, is the CRO, is it a standalone sort of profitable business? If it wasn't for Talem and some of the other things that are obviously needing capital, does the CRO stand on its own right now, or is there still a little ways to go to get there?
Yeah, actually, each of the individual wet lab sites that participate in the contract research are profitable and could stand alone.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the CRO. The other sort of piece I wanted to talk about was Talem. Talem is basically part of the business that takes advantage of the expertise that you have and the discovery methods that you have, and try to find your own drugs. You've got a couple of drugs that are kind of in the pipeline. What can you tell us about the status of any of the things in there right now?
Yeah. So the status of the ones that we're doing with regard to the partnerships, or just
I think anything inside of Talem.
Okay.
You've got a couple of assets in there that
we do.
you're hopeful that we'd see.
I can give you the whole update. Yeah,
Let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice to have the opportunity to do that, because this show gives the opportunity to give maybe a little bit more non-material granularity to those sorts of things. So maybe first I'll back up a little bit and just talk about kind of the main revenue pillars that we have identified within BioStrand, and what these revenue streams are. And then I can take you a little deeper into where we are with those revenue streams, and how we're doing to date, and what our expectations are. So the first one, which is, probably the most obvious, is the one we just spoke about, right? So this is the potential for a fee-for-service model, where we really felt we had this unique position to really connect the kind of state of the art and silico portion of the work that we're doing with the fee-for-service model that exists in the contract research, in part because one of the bigger challenges in the business development and client relations side of the work that we do is, that initial outreach and onboarding of clients. And what we see here is this opportunity where we have the relationship, we have the key decision makers, we actually have, the information that we always collect when we're validating a key decision maker through the process of taking them from a prospect to a lead to a client. And so we know we're talking to the right people, essentially. And so what we did is we started off by developing these in silico services that really complement what we're doing in the traditional wet lab setting, to provide really a comprehensive offering. So some of the ones that we have now developed to date, and I think for people who are familiar with in silico work and coding and what goes into actually the development of new code to be able to solve more sophisticated problems in the biological realm, which is much more complicated, for instance, than a small molecule realm. I think there's a great appreciation out there from our peers of how much we've been able to accomplish in 1 year in coding, and then getting to the point where we're offering these services within the CRO. So some of them you've probably heard about. We have our NLP-driven target identification and analysis. So it's really considered. I think I read an article at one point that said that 33% of researchers would identify that target identification as really being the most challenging part of doing a novel therapeutic program. And the NLP driven AI that we have, if you think back to some of the things we've really been trying to educate our audience on lately about solving the information integration dilemma, right? This is really at the power of how we're able to, it gets to the power of what we're able to do here with things like identifying novel targets for disease, where we can integrate information about any sort of sequence, whether it's, DNA or RNA or a protein sequence. by utilizing those patented HIFT patterns, we can take information about the three-dimensional structure of a molecule. We can also extract information about the function of a molecule. And we can do a lot of that also through textual information on concepts and relationships of the words that exist in text. And so this is what we're referring to when we talk about, having all of these different modalities in a single platform, being able to harness them to get real insight. Things like target analysis, target identification are a really great example of how we can use a tool like that to go in and get information about targets with regard to its structure, with regard to its function, mutations that might exist, its role in a particular disease, how you might want to target that particular protein of interest. And as you've seen in some of our recent case studies, in particular, one presented at Jefferies, it was a great example also of how we were able to get an in-depth analysis of a target and some potential inhibitors for it. So in addition to that, we also have unveiled our immunogenicity testing. That one, as you can see from what I just mentioned, is already incredibly popular. We literally just rolled it out a few weeks ago, and we have multiple different programs that have already incorporated that. And that's also been great because we get that ear and we're able to talk about so much more than just coming into additional in silico offerings in the wet lab. But the immunogenicity testing, and we're coupling that to the humanization. So they're bringing those new people for that as well. Binding predictions is another thing that we've unveiled, and we've now used that successfully for multiple clients. And those are really interesting. That's what we refer to as docking, where we're able to actually take the target and then take an antibody, whether we've designed it in silico or it's an antibody that's known or a small molecule that's known. And we can actually do predictions on the docking. Does it bind? Where does it bind? How strong does it bind? That's our relative affinity rankings. And all of those are things that historically would have taken some sort of wet lab service. When we talk about binding predictions or docking, oftentimes very complicated and expensive ones. For instance, electron microscopy is one way that people oftentimes confirm that type of a behavior. And so we're very it might not seem rapidly, but it's incredibly rapid. We're very rapidly moving in within silico offerings that are putting aside the traditional wet lab offerings that people have always used. And we love this because we think we have insights that people can't possibly have because of the HIFT patterns that enable us to computationally take on much larger loads than other AI-driven companies. But they give us insights that wet labs would never give us as well by connecting information and data and the precision that it gives us. And then we also love it because the rev rec is faster. It's a lot faster for us to do this work in silico than it is in the lab, and the profit margins are much, much higher. So we're still trying to get a handle on exactly what those are for the work we've already done, but at least our finance department was confident in saying over 90% of it is profit. So that's quite exciting for us. So that's just some of the offerings we put out there. We've gotten a lot of good industry feedback as we've gone out to conferences and presented to peers. Anecdotally, I think one of the best pieces of feedback we got was from an AI company that is a part of a very, very reputable technology group, who said they've been working on the immunogenicity side of putting together an AI offering for over 18 months and just haven't been able to do it because of the onus of working with that much information from a computational perspective. So that's been great feedback for us in that realm. Another component with regard to just kind of revenue streams for BioStrand, which you alluded to there with the deals that we've had with a couple of groups, is the in silico de novo antibody discovery and development. And that's much more of a milestone and royalty based agreement with partners, at least by and large, for the most part, it will be. And that's obviously a completely different revenue stream for us. As many of you know, we started off by doing this with early adopter programs so that we could not only announce the program, but more importantly, as you're beginning to see discuss those programs as we start to get results and data off. So we can give updates on kind of where those programs are and how they're doing. And more importantly, the final results we will be able to convert to case studies and to share with the public. So we can actually prove to people we can do some of these things where, you know, other people have never been able to show this. And for us, that's the important part. We're attempting to tackle things that just simply could not be done in a wet lab. That was our initial ask for these early adopters. We want something that is so complicated that you have tried over and over and just have never been successful with. And that is just going to become more and more of a growing need in our market sector, because small molecules really addressed a lot of the simple receptors that were out there that we would refer to as like type 1 or type 2 receptors, very simple with regard to their structure. And now we've really moved into a place in medicine where we're addressing quite complicated targets that, for instance, ion channels, GPCRs, things that we haven't been able to target quite as readily, things where you do see companies kind of cropping up and saying, we're focusing on these, we have these great tools, but really in the end, we haven't seen a lot of therapeutics that have been successfully developed against these. And yet these are the majority of, you know, the chronic and deadly diseases that still exist that are being considered to be, you know, undruggable in nature, where we just don't have satisfying treatments that leave people, you know, just with severe sequela or after effects of the disease or the treatment, or the treatments themselves tend to be quite toxic. And so, as many of you know, we've signed on 2 different groups to date in this category. One is a company called BriaCell. With the BriaCell project, we're now actually through all of the in silico phases of the project. And those programs, the sequences for the lead candidates there, were turned over to our wet lab facilities. The actual gene constructs for wet lab validation are currently in manufacturing. That's an outsourced activity. And then when that's received back, obviously the aim with that is to validate the binding and then also the affinity relative to the benchmark, which is a biosimilar that we're producing from an original candidate. And then in addition to that, Astellas. So we're working on the Astellas portion of the program, which is targeting a tumor microenvironment protein. So a protein on the surface of a tumor, but one that historically is difficult to target because of the environment around that tumor. We're approaching right now the completion of phase 1 in BioStrand with that program, and which essentially is obviously a lot of the molecular dynamic analyses, a lot of the in silico work that really sets us up to, you know, dig in and start producing actual potential candidates for that work. We're in weekly updates with Astellas, just continue to apprise them of where we are, and it's been a great relationship so far. So we'll keep you updated as that one continues to move along. An important thing here as well is that we actually do have other projects here in the de novo in silico antibody space. In particular, we have one that we brought in still kind of on an early adopter aspect, but where they're actually, you know, paying us more in a fee-for-service model. And the reason for that is that particular group is bringing a lot of intellectual property to that work, and they need to ensure that they retain the IP custody as we move through the program. So we have a couple of programs that have been rolling into BioStrand with that group. And I can pull up the details here in a little bit just on how that translates with regard to new programs that have been signed in BioStrand. But before I do that, I do want to just mention one more component or revenue stream, which I think is incredibly important. More so every day, we're realizing just how valuable this revenue stream could be for BioStrand as we continue to get more outside validation with regard to the quality of our offering versus others that specialize in this space. And that's the data organization and management platform, which is, in development for a SaaS model after a transition. So really what this is, there's been such a large amount of data that has been produced over the last couple of decades. We've talked about this a lot with regard to all sorts of omic data, disparate data, right? It might exist in different types of sequences, but maybe even more importantly, that that data might be in different locations. There might be data that's in textual format. It might be in publications. It might even be in doctor's notes. You might have clinical trial data. You might have results off of various, outputs from your laboratory. And the biggest challenge, and I think this is just very widely agreed upon and known in the pharma industry today, is, how do we harness all of this data? How do we bring this together to harmonize it? How can we possibly integrate all of that information that is so different fundamentally in nature, to use it, to take it from what right now is more of either a liability or just a cost, because you still have to store that data, to something that is actually an asset and that you can get meaningful insights from. And, I think everyone's always known that eventually there would be a way to get those meaningful insights. And so that's why we are having companies coming and saying, they have one company we're talking with and working with right now has got 16 years of disparate data. Another one said 20 years, and they've got these in the cloud and on flash drives and on hard drives and even on floppy disks. They're really existing everywhere. And everyone kind of knew this data would be valuable, but was waiting for the opportunity to be able to organize it and manage it. And then more importantly, for the researchers, really able to be able to make sense out of this, to analyze it. And so, we mentioned in our last earnings call that, we had kind of moved this side of the work aside because we really thought, with BioStrand and all the things that they could do with Lens AI and the HIFs that are powering that, we needed to focus, right? We really needed to determine exactly, where they were going to put their energy into, knowing that everything we do builds our software, but also knowing that, we needed to give kind of a clear-cut vision and revenue generation. So we started on the antibody side of things, but then, as I mentioned in our last earnings call, we received an inquiry from a large pharma company, specifically about data organization and data management. And, initially, I don't know what the actual initial number was. I believe it was over 100 companies that were reviewed and then brought down to somewhere like 30 companies that were called in for an RFP, in-person visit and pitch. So, BioStrand participated in that, even though this wasn't the platform we had been focusing on. And I think we had great validation out of those interviews and out of the feedback with regard to what we presented, even though we actually didn't have, the user interfaces on there to be able to show them how they would actually utilize directly that platform. The feedback was good enough that we made it to the final 3 in that RFP, and we're still in the final 3 of the RFP. We've gone back, we've presented additional information at their request, and my understanding is that's now with procurement, which basically essentially typically means that they're really looking at the cost, so the cost relative to the value of what they're getting for these programs. But for us, that served as a tremendous validation that, while even without that being a primary focus, they have competed with companies that do that and just that as a SaaS model. And our goal has always been eventually to convert this to a SaaS model, because when we do, when that user interface and all of the coding is completed on that organization and management platform, the SaaS model is really just a very high profit margin, low energy type of program for us that can be widely distributed to multiple clients, obviously, at one time. Now I think similar things have happened with regard to, what we saw with that first company. We're now engaged, including that company, with 3 large pharma who have also seen the potential for our data organization and management platform. And all of them are coming to us, kind of in the way that we hope that when we're really working with that qualified individual to make those key decisions on the data organization, that they also would be tightly integrated to the therapeutics groups. And so the questions and the quotes that we're having requested are really along the lines of each of these revenue streams for each of these large pharma. So that's a very exciting part of where we are with each of those 3 pillars. Now, I think one of the things that I emphasize, I think is one of the most important things to keep in mind there. One of the things that we're really excited about is how quickly we can do these types of programs in silico versus wet lab, and what that means for RevRec, what that means for profit margins, and the ability for us to combine all of these business units, which means that, when they're coming for a certain component of a business unit, we end up bringing other components they wouldn't naturally maybe have brought to us, because it's an integrated platform at this point. Also, we keep an eye on the fact that this is really, that learning loop, that active learning loop that continues to train our software and continues to especially make more connections between the structure of a HIFT and the function of a molecule, which we still hear in a lot of different, conversations out there, whether it's in podcasts or with other companies, that, oh, that's the problem to solve, right? Like, no one's able to take us from structure to function. We've been, I think, blessed in the industry to have groups like Google and Facebook, and even Microsoft starting to get involved more in the AI-driven component of the biologic space, both from coding on various algorithms with an emphasis on target analysis, biomarker discovery, and various aspects of, for instance, AlphaFold being able to do a structural modeling from sequences. But everyone, including those companies, admits that the dilemma is then there. How do you go from a structure to function? And that's why the component of being able to integrate in one platform all of these different modalities happening in one framework, and to be able to combine all of that for the insights that we are able to see, and then knowing that within there, a component of that is the structure-function relationship. We have insights that people didn't think were possible. And that's why we're being able to roll out a lot of these offerings, but it's also why we feel really strongly that what we have built here, and now with this additional in silico work, especially with these active learning loops, continuing to inform us about the structure-function relationships of HIVs, that this patented technology is really paramount to where the industry ends up going with regard to AI and really any type of biologic realm. We're starting here in antibodies, but it's really, really important to remember that these HIFs are universal in the biosphere. So while we train them on antibodies, it is learning the structure-function relationships that are key for vaccine design and development, for biomarker discovery, for agricultural purposes, both crop and animal agrimed or agritech. I mean, these areas all intersect right there with the HIFs, and so again, right now we're staying focused on where we are, but with the knowledge that we're continuing to enrich that information. Now, specifically in BioStrand, Paul, just in the recent weeks here, we actually have added several agreements with one company that are totaling about $450,000 of quotes and statement of work that have been agreed upon between our client relations team and the key decision makers there. And then, as I mentioned, we rolled in something like 5 or 6 different immunogenicity and humanization programs into their pipeline. And those are all things that are signed off on. And it's the immunogenicity part and the humanization, since they come kind of downstream of a wet lab capability, that part of the work won't kick off until we have a better grasp of the upstream work, how big those are, how many different candidates need to flow into the immunogenicity portion of the study. And that'll give us a better sense of, the actual statement of work that will accompany that and the actual price tag. But right now it looks like immunogenicity and humanization will start at somewhere around the $200,000 mark and go up from there, depending on the scale. So, So we've got the 450,000, with regard to these more more abstract kind of de novo programs we're working on in the in silico. And then we have these humanization immunogenicity studies that have also come in. So that's pretty recent and pretty rapid integration since announcing these capabilities.
So really what I heard here is that there's been a significant amount of validation in what you guys have done, and not necessarily just those BriaCell and Astellas deals that are announced. There's other things that have been validated that you've been able to go and either, at least get companies interested enough to sort of generate quotes, or in some cases, you now have revenue that's being generated through BioStrand. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, yeah, so that's I wanted to make that exactly clear. So
Yep.
BioStrand is now revenue generating. You guys have validated a number of the components out there. There's still some validation that we're waiting on in terms of some of the sort of, we'll call it the bigger deals. Yep. But clearly you guys you've made some good headway there. It's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we're really, really excited. And we're now moving those kind of bigger deal structures away from the early adopter components. We feel like, with what we've got, we'll likely have enough information to produce great case studies. And there's enough demand that we really feel that supply demand is really, the supply demand kind of relationship is really warranting us to just move into upfront technology fees. So that's now part of the conversation with all the new groups that have come in.
And can you give us a sense of, like, BioStrand is a standalone business, kind of like what's the ongoing costs associated with BioStrand? I mean, it's, in my mind, there's a lot of computers and a handful of people, but give us a sense of what's the quarterly or monthly or whatever you want to call it burn rate.
Actually, I don't have the insight into the cost center at my hand right now with regard to their standalone. I just have the consolidated information. But what I can say is that, BioStrand is really, really inexpensive compared to what we, would normally do on our other side of things, because of the material reagent load, which is typically a large portion of the cost at a wet lab location. So as you alluded to here with your question, the majority of the cost there is really the FTEs. And keep in mind, compared to
What's
most—
an FTE?
I'm sorry, full-time equivalents. So employees.
Okay.
Yeah, we tend not to measure by head count. We measure by full-time equivalent, because especially in parts of Europe, people don't always work 5 days a week. They have options. At the state level with the number of hours they take on. So we measure by full-time equivalents. So it's really those FTEs, and then computer and cloud storage. And so the overall cost is significantly reduced to what we would typically spend, and that's where you see that reflected, is in that profit margin. And then, in comparison to a lot of other AI companies in this space, we are really small. So what we've managed to do with the number of people that we have and the number of companies we have managed to surpass with our capabilities, but then also, I would say, definitely the quality of the coding and the fact that we have these patented technologies behind that, driving it, that are giving us these insights that others literally cannot get. It's kind of incredible that we're doing that with somewhere like 10 people doing that coding. It's incredible. And what that also means for us is that when we forecast and look at, what we need to really, continue to put into that site, it's a lot less than what people would normally think, compared to a traditional AI company.
Fantastic. So you mentioned BriaCell earlier, that you guys are in the wet lab, sort of validating things in there. What's the next step? Assuming there's success in the wet lab, what do you see as the next step?
Yeah, for BriaCell, so assuming success in the wet lab, there is in that contract, there's a mandatory payment for them to take possession of that. And I think as mentioned in the press release, it's a little bit unusual that way, simply because it's literally we meet the criteria, then that upfront payment is paid. And then after that, we have a series of milestone payments. And I think that's also a little bit unusual with regard to what you would typically see in our industry for milestone and royalty payments, because our milestone payments actually kick in sooner than would typically be the case. Now, I don't remember exactly on this one what the details are, because we now have multiple agreements out there, but I believe that they're hitting earlier in the sense that they're hitting the preclinical stage and at an IND application stage, and not waiting just until you actually have a clinical trial or first in human activities. And so that's also quite a benefit for us. And part of that was how the early adopter portion of programs were negotiated. Oops, I think you're on mute.
Okay, perfect. I don't know what happened there. So my
Just
apologies.
like auto muted.
Yeah, I did, and I couldn't unmute myself, so my apologies. Okay, so very, very cool. I've got a couple questions that have come in here. I'm gonna fire them off here,
Okay.
and for the sake of time, we'll try to get them as quick as we can.
Sure.
So we've touched on BioStrand right now. A couple questions come in on Polytope. So still no updates on Polytope. What can you tell us about the status of Polytope right now?
Yeah, so the status on Polytope, we are working very closely with members of the management team at ChemPartner to come to a mutually satisfactory agreement on how to manage what we felt was, well, we will just say a very late delivery of the product. We have now received the product. The product is now with a third partner doing an independent quality control audit of the product to make sure that it meets each of the qualifications associated with not only GMP compliance, for the final product, but also, each of the standards with regard to characteristics it needs to have retained. So the overall quality of the product, the overall ability for it to continue to neutralize and bind. So we have those products in hand. We're doing the QC work through a validated third party so that it is completely independent. And then those will go into a validated cryopreservation storage, which means that it has all of the necessary monitoring so that they could be applied in a clinical setting. However, of course, we are completely, unsatisfied with the timeline deliveries. And that is all that we are authorized to say by our legal department about the current situation. But I can say there are active discussions. I actually just met with one of the CEOs of one of the ChemPartner companies in Boston last week to have a real sit-down discussion about paths forward and how we really can come to something that is more satisfying on IPA's behalf, but also, that is, enables the two groups to continue to recognize synergies going forward. So that's really all I'm able to say. But what I can say is we're working really hard on it. I think we have been creative. I think both groups want to make sure that there is a resolution that is satisfying to IPA and its investors.
Okay, fair enough. So on the sort of talent front, next question is on talent. Well, I guess it's any of the targets, any updates on any of the Talum projects, including TATX. I think it's 200. I've lost track of all the different numbers.
Everybody loses track because it's a lot of it's just hard using unique identifiers. But TATX 200 is our bi-specific program, which is definitely something we've had a lot of interest in. So yeah, so I actually pulled the other day just for a kind of a powwow conversation internally on where the Talum assets are at. And that was stimulated in particular by a particular conversation we had at a recent conference. And when I was kind of pulling the larger data overall in Talum, there were a couple of interesting things that I think would be worth sharing here as well. I think one of them is that, you know, we through our prospecting and we have our business development and client relations teams that really head up the prospecting and conversations regarding Talum. They've now done outreach on non-COVID Talum programs to over 300 companies that were pre-qualified. And interestingly, right now, the majority of the interest, if we count it within like companies expressing a particular interest, as opposed to how far along a negotiation might be, is in our TrkB antibodies. TrkB is one arm of that bi-specific asset, but the TrkB antibodies that can still be licensed or sold are not the ones that are combined and also have been submitted for patent by IPA. They're different antibodies to the same target that more than likely will be used in an antibody drug conjugate setting. So taking the specificity of the antibody, getting you to the target, and at the same time bringing along with it a drug that has a potential to then be a direct chemotherapeutic for that tumor that has been accessed. So there's been quite a bit of interest there. The furthest along in due diligence, however, is that TATX 200 or the bispecific antibody, which is a TrkB CD3 combination. Where we're really putting our energy here, I mean, we obviously have seen us getting out there to conferences, sitting down and meeting with these groups. A lot of these have turned into kind of repeat meets with the same companies interested in some of these assets. And then obviously we continue to address new clients. We're finding there is a little bit of a shift here in the clientele when the new clients are coming in. As you know, a lot of the smaller companies that are just pipeline focused, so they don't have revenue. It's a very, very binary outcome, right? They just, you know, raise capital to run very expensive clinical trial programs, and then they'll have a binary outcome. We've obviously seen, I'm sure everybody here paying attention to this market, we've seen a lot of those companies fail over the last year and kind of have to throw in the towel because they are, you know, required to, you know, live off of raised capital and don't have, you know, revenue to fall back. And then they have just, you know, one or two things that they can manipulate to earn capital or to earn revenue. And that is, you know, the clinical outcome. And so we've seen a shift really with more of large pharma getting involved. And I think based on what they're telling us, also they're seeing that opportunity with less competition in that space to, you know, really come in and look at these earlier stage assets to bring into their pipeline. So one of the, I think, more interesting things we've seen as of late is a repeat group that has come back, specifically looking at, you know, one more piece of data that they want to see on one of our antibodies of interest, which is not one of those two, but just based on how much information I've given, I probably won't say which one that it was. And so that's of interest to us in particular because they've continued to show interest for about the last 8 months, I believe. And it's really just one piece of additional information which we're currently working on for them and which is actually very inexpensive for us to complete for this particular company. Another interesting fact is that it was actually Astellas's interest in our pipeline in Talum that actually led them to the BioStrand route of things, because they were very interested in one of the actual assets to a particular target, but then realized that there were some really interesting things that they could do there using the AI. that again, the wet lab, wouldn't have managed. So that was quite interesting for us. Another detail that I thought was kind of interesting from a recent update from our BD team was that we have about 60 clients that are awaiting additional information or data for follow-on conversations. So that's kind of the status of where those conversations are. I think the two furthest along here in conversation are the bi-specific and then the one that I just mentioned, where we have a particular client waiting one particular piece of information. However, I do think it's also important to note that on earlier stage programs in Talem, we've really identified about 5 key assets that are further along, where we either have some functional information or we have enough information to really demonstrate some inherent value in those assets in a best-in-class or first-in-class manner. For other ones that were a little bit earlier, where we're still doing some of the characterization, lead candidate selection, those sorts of things, we really put a pause on those. And held those where they are, just so that we can focus on the BD aspects of getting some of these other assets at the door. And really also use that as an opportunity to reduce burn and be a little bit more specific and constructive with regard to the assets that are moving forward. And also with regard to keeping an eye on the fact that, we're also getting, generation of novel assets out of BioStrand as well. So from a strategic perspective, a lot of conversation happening in our business development team with upper management about those programs going forward, making sure that we're just being very strategic and very conscientious about the burn that goes into those types of programs, as well as the programs that are in combination with other companies, and then very strategic about which programs we're moving forward, and very focused on the discussions right now around the assets that are under due diligence.
Now, you mentioned sort of you've cut the burn on the Talem side of things. Are there other areas of the business where you've cut back on expenses? That's been one of the concerns, and maybe we'll talk to it as well. Heavy burn, but that was mostly Polytope and Talem. That's been reduced. It sounds like you probably made some cost cuts elsewhere. So that question, and then what is the outlook for financing requirement?
So yes, we definitely made cuts there. We also, at the end of every fiscal year, I typically go in and I do about, the bottom 10% cut, where we're just not seeing really the impact that we want, the output that we want. Whether it's something that should be contributing to revenue generation or something that's contributing to information that will be commercializable and then translate to shorter term revenue generation. So that's always been a philosophy that I've had since coming into IPA, but this year we really ramped that too. We took a closer look at some of the areas where, those individuals or departments were working, and asked ourselves a question about whether or not we could look at some, for instance, departmental consolidation. And so when you hear me referring to, for instance, business development and client relations, and that's a departmental consolidation. We actually also reduced very recently here our Talem staff by about 50%. And we really asked those individuals to stay, specifically focused on, what information is needed for out licensing events, what types of activities are very associated with, shorter or midterm revenue generation. Really kind of dug deep and had some heart-to-heart conversations around things that might be more academic in nature, and eliminating those types of programs. And then, of course, part of the reason why we're able to do that as well is a lot of time and energy from the Talem team did need to go into the Polytope program. And even when those programs were in the process of drug product development, they still require a lot of checks and balances back and forth with that team in preparation for a lot of the work that we did for clinical trial. For instance, patient consent, and patient profiles and that sort of work that needed to be done. So we've made some additional reductions there. We also, as I mentioned, we're looking across kind of different departments and even different individuals with regard to, how do we get that translation? Are we really getting the workload that we would want to see with regard to a viable output that directly contributes to commercialization? We saw cuts in several areas, sales individual that, if they're not making their KPIs, which again, that was the whole point of putting that CRM in place that we talked about for quite some time. So we have that transparency. We can see, and not just what someone's doing, but how effective is it? Does it translate to a call that's really meaningful with the scientific team? And does that translate to a quote? And does that translate to a sales order? And if we're not seeing those numbers, then that tells us everything that we need to know. So I think by and large, it's safe to say that we made cuts across probably most departments throughout the company. Where we would normally do that again at a smaller level, we were, I think, much more aggressive with that this year, and really focusing on, again, commercialization outcomes, revenue outcomes in the departments where we have really meaningful KPIs, the achievement of those KPIs. So that's been a very big focus, both of the management team and the board working together to make sure that, we're meeting that objective and we're finding, meaningful ways, to slow down that burn. Despite the fact that, the majority of that, historical burn was associated with COVID, that impacted us in a way that, looking forward, we obviously needed to assess that forward-looking burn as well. So I think we've done a great job with that. There are still a few more to come, but what we've been really, really careful with is making sure that we don't cut things that would impact revenue, that would impact, the quality of things that eventually will feed revenue. And they don't impact, our core innovation, which is, a big part of our identity and what's really driving the differentiators for IPA today.
Gotcha. We got about 10 or 15 minutes left, so I'm going to try to fit in as many of these last little questions we've got.
Sure. Okay.
So, we've seen you at the Jefferies conference now. There's an interview you just did for another organization. Obviously you're getting out in front of more and more investors and institutional investors. Just what's the atmosphere like out there as far as investor interest in general for life sciences and obviously in IPA?
Oh yeah, that's actually a great question. It was actually a huge topic of conversation at JP Morgan this year in January. I think we've been fortunate that we have a nice selection of information to draw from to make this type of analysis. Because I think if we look at, just like the trailing 12 months, we did get out there to Jefferies, but we also hit the Ladenburg-Thalmann conference. We hit Benchmark twice. We hit the HCW, the Gravitas. So we've been able to hit different parts of the country. And we've coupled most of those and various institutional investors and hedge funds at those groups. We've coupled most of those also with the ability to also meet with broker dealers and family offices with non-deal roadshows that were sponsored or set up for us by our new to the street media group. And so we've actually seen a little bit of a shift, leading up to JP Morgan. I think there was a lot of not great outlook and energy, a lot of hope at JP Morgan. And then I think after that, it was a little slow for it to take off. And now what we really see is overall, yes, a lot of, I think, enthusiasm about investment in the tech space in particular. For us personally at IPA, we've had quite a bit of interest in investment, in particular from institutional funds, as we really start to look at, what is important for IPA, right? In terms of when we look at potential investments in the future, the most important things to take into consideration. And of course, some of that is, high grade institutional investors. how, given our historical kind of unconventional path to the public market and diverging from that IPO route, how do we really access these meaningful investors? And then right now, getting our finger on the pulse of how they're feeling and about IPA in our story. And the feedback has been great. We're not in a position right now to actually, do any sort of raise. So for those people who aren't familiar with the process, for raising when we're on the NASDAQ, we right now are working to file what's called an F3. F3 is also known as a registration statement, but it's like the US version, right, of a Canadian shelf prospectus. And then after filing that, we would file a supplement. So we're in a position right now where most institutional investors could not or would not actually invest in IPA because of the lack of that registered statement. However, that includes buying in the market for a multitude of reasons, but that changes relatively soon for us. I have an estimate from the finance department that we'll be filing that around the first week of July. And so we've had a number of institutions actually come in with an expressed interest in investing in IPA, and even as far as putting term sheets on the table. They're outside of having a registered statement on file. That's not really considered to be advisable because you just don't get the types of terms that you would like for a multitude of legal reasons and things that need to be associated with that type of a deal structure. And we have on the flip side of that, probably 4 or 5 different groups that have an expressed interest in coming along IPA for an investment after the registered statement is filed. It doesn't mean we'll raise money right away, and we're certainly not looking at ever raising large amounts of money at one time because of the fact that our burn is lower than most companies doing what we do. But we're really looking at that balance of, really kind of high profile or long-term substantial institutional investor that can support the company and also demonstrate that fundamental due diligence led them to come alongside IPA and clear the path for other institutions that are also interested.
We're almost out of time here. It always goes way faster than I like it to, because I always have 100 questions left to ask. But Jennifer, I'll leave it sort of a little open-ended. Okay. What sort of things should we be watching out for, either metrics or catalysts that might make sense to pay attention to? And then just lastly, sort of what's the key takeaway you want everybody to walk away with today?
Yeah, those are really good questions, Paul. So metrics and catalysts, I really firmly believe that while our CRO services have, they've won these great accolades and they continue to be our bread and butter, and they continue really, in particular, several of our opportunities, our offerings to drive innovation in the space. I think we all also understand at IPA that a lot of what we do is converging into that AI. And so I think, when we look at milestones, when we look at things to watch for, I think it really is around us tapping into those 3 pillars of the revenue streams that have been identified specifically for BioStrand. Because what I anticipate is that, we're seeing these come in already, right? We're seeing it come in different areas from, the de novo and silico work, from the fee-for-service component when we talk about more immediate revenue, and the laboratory wet lab supplements that are being done. My belief, our belief internally, is that that's going to continue to just really generate more and more revenue from those companies and others as they see the successes coming out of there. And so I think that's one thing to watch for is, these revenue pillars continuing to be bought into, continuing to drive more clients to them, and we'll continue to give updates on those. Because I think eventually what we're going to see is a relatively rapid growth once those begin to take off. And the SaaS model will also be a really important driver for that. Take-home message. I think the take-home message, especially with something, when we're focusing on the AI and the BioStrand and what we do with those is what we've done in the amount of time that we have had BioStrand, which was just a year ago, April, is incredible. It is incredible. We have accomplished things that not only other people haven't been able to accomplish in terms of offerings and services, but we've also built this unified framework where we have, these multiple modalities, which are things that other companies have not been able to do, which enables us to solve bigger problems. And so, when we really look at kind of fundamentally what we've done here, I think we need to remember, importantly, that this is not like, for instance, when we talk about the IID use case, that's not about solving one problem. We have literally built a technology that can answer numerous problems. And that is something that we will continue to develop and we will continue to roll out in different ways. And so, realizing that the fact that we've provided a solution like that, where, anecdotally, we even had what was it? Meta AI, Facebook company, even last week, being very excited about the fact that they merged, text and image, 2 modalities in a single framework, right? So you got to keep in mind the significance of what we've done. For people to keep their focus on what does this mean for us in 1 year? What does this mean for us in 2 years? Instead of the immediate revenue generation that's coming in, that's indicative of companies understanding where we're going and the power of what we're doing. But the speed at which we've done that, and then what it takes to actually, further develop and roll out a product like that. And that's what it is. It's a technology, product that can be used to solve a multitude of problems, is a really good, I think, healthy framework for investors to have, knowing that we wholeheartedly believe in what has been developed here. And we are getting it out in front of people, but also knowing that our patented technology is something that gives us kind of an advantage here down this runway. And it's something that's really important that we build the software right so that we protect that at all costs. So that's really our big focus internally that I think is important to share.
Fantastic. Like I said, always have 100 other questions I'd like to ask you, but there's never enough time. So Jennifer, I want to thank you for your time. It's always great to catch up. Certainly look forward to our next chance to chat, and wish you all the success as I'm a large shareholder and continue to cheer you on. So good luck with everything, and thanks one last time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. All right.
Bye for now.
Bye.